Hey, Deviant friends, it's Dan. Before we get started with the show, just a couple of reminders. If you want to see, read, and hear more about the stories that we're telling, there are a couple ways to do that. First, visit our Patreon at deviantpodcast.com. There you can do all that. See, read, listen, and also join our Discord where you can chat with Andrew and me. Secondly, hit us up on social. Follow us on social. We're at deviant.podcast on TikTok and Instagram. We hope to see you in both of those places. This show contains material which may not be suitable for all audiences.
So we're taking a left here on Carolyn
Drive.
Right, Carolyn Drive.
Taking a left onto Carolyn Drive, where the Dermonds lived in 2014. Life on the lake is kind of an easy sell. Boats, docks, swimming.
It's kind of wooded on...
It's wooded off.
Yeah.
I mean,
Georgia
there's
pines.
still a lot of vacant lots here. And at the time, this house was occupied. The man that lived here then, no, that house wasn't even there. Excuse me.
A lot's changed here in the 10 years that Sheriff Sills has been looking for at least one killer.
This house was a full-time resident, and he worked for Reynolds. I think he still does.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he still has that house.
No, you're not kidding. They're just popping up.
What would you say is the
That one definitely wasn't here.
quote-unquote cheapest entry-level home you could probably get?
That's Clark Goldband, our executive producer.
Here, now,
Yeah.
on the water,
Yeah.
over me.
Right.
That's the neighbor to the Dermond house, okay? That one is, it wasn't there. That house right there, through there, that's the Dermond house. And none of these lots were. Well, I told you we walked hand to hand looking for things all through these woods here.
Mm-hmm.
And they've kind of redone the facade on this house.
Yeah.
That porch didn't look like that at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Garage doors are the same. That stonework where they put in a big pool.
Yeah.
So
This is a little alcove here.
it doesn't look like it did
Yeah. Yeah.
then. Even that house over there, it's that tan house right through there.
Mm-hmm.
That house wasn't here.
So Carolyn Drive has pretty much doubled since 2014 in 10 years in terms of
In
builds.
dwelling houses.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's pretty much utility vans, contractors, and builders. Plenty of activity. And the houses being built on Carolyn Drive now are taking up the empty lots that Sills and his detectives searched 10 years ago, looking for evidence.
Do all of these houses have a dock?
There's no waterfront house anywhere around in the whole county probably that doesn't have a dock. There's no such thing as a house on the water in Putnam County that
Doesn't have a dock.
well, if it hadn't been built yet.
Mm-hmm.
There's one up here that's been on the market for a month now. They're asking $2 million for it. And it's a nice house now, but they're not.
$2
But it's
million
not
nice?
2 million nice.
They're not going to get $2 million for it. Most of the people I talk to in civic groups out here and things like that, and I don't do a lot of that bullshit, I don't, but they're all retired. And what we find is just like the Dermonds. Mr. Dermond had made a $5,000 transfer out of a money market account to pay what I would call what they call nursing home insurance, okay, for he and his wife. The Thursday before this happened, and on his desk were materials where they were looking at retirement facilities. They didn't need nursing home care, but there were brochures and things like that on his desk. They had very much planned their lives. This couple had.
Yeah.
So they were looking at the next move. They'd sold their boat sometime before. They were giving away all of their floats and things like that to, I don't know, it was Habitat or Goodwill. I can't remember. You know, I don't mean they were getting ready to do this next day, but they were that. And that
Sort of downsizing.
That was typical of Russell Dermond's personality that at least I've learned about. You know.
And there was no big life insurance benefactor payout or anything?
No. They did have some life. They were not, contrary to what people think, they were not super wealthy.
We're all wired differently. Some of us are wired for good, some of us are wired for bad, but a select few step outside of all society's boundaries. From Cold Open Media, this is Deviant, the Lake Oconee Murders, Part 3.
Welcome back to Deviant, where we're chasing the truth into the dark corners of what humans are capable of. I'm Andrew Iden.
And I'm Dan Semitovich. In the 10 years that have passed since the murders of Russell and Shirley Dermond, Carolyn Drive is radically different. New residents, new builds. And the house at the end of Carolyn Drive, where the Dermonds were murdered, that house has different owners now. The neighbors who discovered Russell in the garage have moved away. Normalcy, for the most part, is back in the Great Waters community. But the murders, still unsolved, they just kind of linger.
When you stand in Howard Sill's office and look at the stacks of boxes on the floor, the ones labeled Dermond, you can't help but wonder if something in those boxes, some small, minute detail, is the answer that's been overlooked so many times before. Sheriff Sills and FBI agent Andy Smith pore over these files again and again. They let others pore over them too. Fresh eyes that could yield fresh ideas.
I have a local investigator who is a task force officer in our office. So he works with a state agency, a local sheriff's office at the time, and had worked several homicides, and a great investigator. And he'd said, I think I can help Howard. I'm willing to help him. I said, okay, tell you what, let's go. Get in the car. So we drove up here. Howard laid everything out for him and everything, and we get back in the car 8 hours later, and we're driving back towards Macon. It's very quiet. And he looks at me and goes, okay, that's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And that's just an example of what people see when they're in the case and see everything. And there's obviously things that we can't. The sheriff isn't going to come on this podcast or anything else and talk about everything because he can't. He would never do that, nor should he. But that's an example of some of what he's been dealing with for 10 years.
The sheriff in Jacksonville, Florida was my roommate at the FBI National Academy, and they have a real cold, he's got like 4,500 deputies or something, and they have a real cold case squad. And I even reached out to him, and he sent 2 of his cold case people up here to go over, just totally, like I said, sat down with them with the initial crime scene photographs before any placards or anything. This was not right after, this was several years afterwards, at least 3 or 4 years later. I asked, what would y'all do? Everything they came up with, we had already done.
Out of the many big questions surrounding the Dermond murders, one of the biggest is about the killer or killers, of course. Are they still in the area? Sheriff Sills is convinced that the people responsible, they're long gone. He seems to know just about everyone in Putnam County, and he thinks that by now, if they were still around, someone would have talked.
Look, the hoodlum world knows this is a ticket, okay? Crime's not solved by DNA and fingerprints. 99% of crime is solved by somebody telling you something, okay? You may buttress it and nail it down with some other forensic evidence, but this magic DNA that you put into something that you see on TV and then an hour later they tell you who it is, that doesn't exist. But what I'm saying is, in the criminal world, they know this is a ticket, and everybody you arrest is always wanting to trade whatever they've done for something bigger. I remember we arrested 4 or 5 years later, we arrested a pretty significant drug dealer, Aryan Brotherhood guy, not from here, but he was here. And I remember when we hit his house with a search warrant, and I walked in, and he had, a bunch of prior convictions, straight hoodlum. Had guns, had dope, had everything. And I sat down next to him while my detectives were still gathering up stuff, and he said, I don't guess there's any way I can get any help on this case. And I said, yeah, I know a way. He said, Sheriff, if I knew who killed those 2 old people, I'd have told you that when you walked in that door. And so that's why I don't think it's local. And not even, I don't know that it's Georgia, because somebody that knew something about this in our local criminal world, they would have come to us with it in some way.
Here's local reporter Billy Hobbs. He's been following this case from the jump.
There's times when the sheriff has indicated that maybe he'll just get a magical phone call one day and somebody will want to get it off their chest and come in and admit that they're the ones who did it and then tell who the other party was who was with them at the time. But that's a long shot in a case that has lasted a little more now than 10 years.
As we know, the crime scene at the Dermond home doesn't give the police a lot to go on. Shirley's body is found in the lake, Russell's body in their garage, and there's no trace of DNA in the house that belongs to anyone other than Russell and Shirley. At least for a long time, that is. We'll get to that in a bit.
Let's go back to the house for a moment. As far as that crime scene is concerned, I think a lot of people, the first question they would ask is, what about DNA? And I guess the question is, was there DNA? What kind of DNA was it? What kind of results or what kind of information have you gotten?
We were initially informed by everything. We went to the state crime lab at the GBI, and we sat down with everyone. And the state lab told us they found no DNA other than the Dermond's DNA. Of course, we now know that I'm not criticizing them per se. I don't know what they did, but we certainly asked for that. As I said, there was no evidence of anything in that house being disturbed. You know what I'm saying? And touch DNA then was not like it is today.
In criminology, there's something known as Locard's exchange principle. It's named for French forensic scientist Edmond Locard. It's a pretty simple thing. It says that at any point, two things come into contact. There's an exchange of some kind. At any point in the commission of a crime, the perpetrator and the victim will exchange something. DNA, hair, microscopic fibers, or even footprints and fingerprints, something.
In the case of this crime, Locard's exchange principle is tough to apply. Fingerprints and DNA from someone other than the Dermonds have been elusive from the beginning. Whoever committed these crimes is either very lucky or very skilled, and that's kept the investigation stuck in place.
And then, all of a sudden, it gets unstuck. In the fall of 2022, Sheriff Sills learns about Othram Labs, a Texas-based forensic laboratory getting famous in the criminal science world. They've helped solve a number of cold cases around the country, 13 alone in Georgia.
Took all the seats out of my Suburban. I drive a Suburban, and I took every piece of physical evidence we had out to Othram, sat in their boardroom with their people, did a PowerPoint presentation of the crime scene before we even put out any placards or measured or crime scene like that. You'll go in, take a picture of everything before you start moving anything and things like that. And I said, okay, I've got all my physical evidence that I do have. It's out there in that car right now. My wife's out there watching it. I had to take my wife with me because I was so short-handed. And they picked out, I don't want to go into the details of what they picked out, but they picked out certain things. And they did find DNA, okay? And they found DNA that was not Russell Dermond's and was not Shirley Dermond's, okay?
It's a big break in this case. They find DNA. It's not Shirley's and it's not Russell's.
There was a process that they couldn't do. And they said either the FBI could do it or another lab called Sorensen Forensics. And so I eventually took evidence to them, and they asked for more evidence. So they actually have found DNA, and I have to give you kind of an analogy. I have enough DNA right now that if I had a suspect, I could compare it to it. Okay, they're still working on it today. Okay, enough to put it into CODIS. CODIS is the computer database of nor the genealogical computer stuff. We don't, and I like to give the example of fingerprints and AFIS, which is automated. This is an analogy I give people. Okay, I got a fingerprint here, and I may be able to match it to the actual fingerprint, but I don't have enough points on it to put it in AFIS, okay? It lacks that. So they're working on that still today, trying now. I haven't talked to them in several weeks. I did talk to them several weeks ago, and they said that they brought in additional experts in the DNA field, and that it was looking positive, and I have not spoken. I do not want to pressure these people. It's been 10 years. I know it's been 10 years, and I'm sure that there are other cases that are coming up that they might stop and work on that. I understand that. If I have a murder today, I've got to concentrate on that. So I'm paying these people, but I'm not trying to push them or anything like that. So I haven't heard from them in several weeks. But that truly is my hope. I'll be honest with you, that's the only real positive thing we've seen in this investigation. And
So I want to be clear. So you have DNA that is not Russell or Shirley.
Correct.
But what you don't have is who that DNA belongs to.
Reporter Billy Hobbs.
Hopefully some of the evidence that they have taken to these two private labs might reveal something very soon. If there is something there, they're going to know soon. I'll put it that way. They either will know positively or they'll know in a negative way, because it could be touched DNA evidence, meaning that some person who was at the crime scene as an investigator could have easily touched something.
The presence of that DNA is giving Brad Dermond, who is Russell and Shirley's son, new reasons to hope.
We obviously have technology that didn't exist 10 years ago. We got technology that didn't exist 2 years ago. What are your hopes, thoughts on that stuff playing a role in getting this solved?
We're hopeful. Talking to Sheriff Sills, it sounded like he was hitting dead ends until of late with this one particular laboratory, as he called them. They had several hits, and it doesn't have to be blood or saliva. It could just a simple human touch could transfer that DNA evidence. And according to him, they just need more of those hits, and then potentially they could screen it against the felon database.
So when that DNA comes back from Sorensen Labs, it still needs to go into CODIS. That's an acronym that stands for Combined DNA Identification System. It stores thousands of DNA profiles of offenders across the country. Solving the Dermond case with it only works if the DNA they have is in CODIS. If not, well, that's that until a match shows up. This entire process and system isn't as perfect as we might think it is. It's still growing.
What you see on TV is bullshit, okay? I was watching some program last night, and this was in Australia, and this detective was asking a medical examiner for DNA, and she said, well, we'll have it for you in about 6 hours. I said, God almighty, and these things on TV where they do it in less time than that. Come on, people. That's not the world. Nothing near the world. That doesn't exist. And you also need to understand that CODIS is a relatively new phenomenon. We've been taking the fingerprints of people arrested since probably the 20s, certainly
Right.
as long as the FBI.
I remember getting them when I was a kid.
Right, but I'm talking about the criminal database of fingerprints, because we print you for everything you get arrested for, okay? And those get sent to the FBI, and they get downloaded into the APHIS system and stuff like that. DNA samples are only in the state of Georgia people convicted of felonies, and that hadn't been going on but, I don't know, probably less than 20 years.
So if that DNA is in CODIS, and if that DNA is someone who was convicted of a felony, and if that felony was in Georgia, and if that felony was within the last 20 years, investigators may be in business and they may have a suspect. But yeah, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's a lot of ifs.
What's the economy in Putnam County? Tourism on the lake?
It's all now lake construction. We have one small mobile home manufacturing plant, and we have really nothing else. Our tax base is residential. There's still there are 4 dairies left, I think, or 5 dairy farms left in the county. When I graduated from high school, everybody in this county, other than a couple of lawyers and one doctor and some things like that, everybody farmed. It was the leading milk production county in the whole state for I don't know, 60 years or something.
Got it.
You can't farm really anymore with the size. Lord, I don't remember how many we used to milk at my grandmother's when I was a boy, but it was certainly less than 100.
There's a sort of trope about small town sheriffs, right? You know, the Andy Griffith type, all aw shucks and kind of naive to the world outside. By now, though, you should understand that Sheriff Howard Sills, who speaks with that honey drip southern drawl, is not naive. He's not aw shucks. And for reporters like us, oh man, he's a gem.
He's not afraid to tell you what he thinks, and he's not afraid to tell you the truth. As much as he can, anyway. This story is first and foremost about Russell and Shirley Dermond and the pursuit of justice for their family. But it's also about Howard Sills. He's a Putnam County man born and raised here. His task is protecting the people who live here and finding an answer to the case that just won't unlock. Here's Brad Dermond again.
We feel that he is doing everything possible to solve it. He's done a nice job staying in touch with us, keeping us apprised of anything that's happened. Talking to him, I think he said he wakes up thinking about it every single day. So,
Pastor David Key is the minister at the church where Russell and Shirley worshiped. You've heard his voice throughout this story.
Sheriff Sills, he's still sheriff of Putnam County, and I know he personally wants to solve this issue. I would argue he's a good man, and I would argue this will be one of those things that if he does, and when he does retire, if it hasn't been solved by that point, I think it will be a very, just a blow to him personally that he never did get it solved, even though I think he's done all he could. There's not been any kind of mess up in the investigation or anything like that. There's not been any accusations that somehow they haven't done what they're supposed to. I think they've done everything they have been able to do and could do.
If it's an unsolved murder case or whatever, he's gonna pull out all the stops or whatever to find the guilty party and bring them to justice. And he's not one that's going to lay low or whatever and pretend as though it's going to solve itself. He's going to be talking to people and re-questioning people. He's going to be going through financial records and that sort of thing, just like he has in this case.
Make no mistake about it. I have never made any kind of case in my career, especially my murder cases that almost all have gone to trial, that I wish I had not done something I didn't do, or wish I'd done something differently. Any case, that's always the case. And I can assure you that I'm sure that I've made mistakes here. I've never been without making a mistake. Hindsight is a marvelous thing. It's unbelievable. There's nothing like sitting at that table during a trial and wishing you had done something that you didn't do. That comes out in every trial. We still get the conviction, but while you're sitting there, that's what you're thinking. I should have done this, or I wish I'd done that, or why didn't I do so and so? But as far as these people that come up, the detectives, and say things, we talk to everybody. I talk to absolute lunatics every week. But when they call in here, if it's Dermond, we're gonna listen.
We take the call. Now, it doesn't matter.
For Christ's sake, do the right thing. If you don't want to do it for the right thing, we got some money. We'll pay you for it. Okay. Anybody who would do this is going to do this to somebody else, or already has done it to somebody else, and they're a threat to society. And then you have a duty as a human being. But if you're mercenary in nature and don't feel that way, we got a little money we'll give you for that information. But call us. We'll do everything possible to protect your identity. And the bottom line is the right thing to do. And somebody knows this, and they should call us or call the FBI. You don't like me, call the FBI. If you don't like the FBI, call me. If you don't like either one of us, call your sheriff or the policeman down the street that's your cousin or friend. Okay, let's do the right thing.
Let's fast forward and say that in 6 months there's a call that somebody's confessed or something, and you're able to make an arrest. Having gotten to know you a bit, I'm curious what you would say to the person when you put the bracelets on them for this crime?
Honestly, I probably wouldn't say. You look, contrary to what you see in movies and things, we're not smart asses. And all I would be thinking about is what I got to do at that trial. That's all I'd be. See, that's something else. It's not just making the arrest. You got to try it. I mean, people do plead out. I'm not saying that, but I'm constantly thinking. I grew up in the DA's office. The man who raised me in my adolescent years to adulthood was the district attorney. I knew how to try a murder case before I knew how to write a speeding ticket. And so I never stop until that jury comes back and says, guilty.
Presumably, that would close the book on the Dermond murder. And then things move back to Eatonton, 12 miles from Great Waters. The prosecution would happen at the corner of Jefferson and West Marion Streets, back where we started this story.
So we're coming up here to the corner of the courthouse. And I guess this is where, if Sheriff Sills is going to make an arrest in the Dermond case, this is where the final chapter of that story would kind of be written, right? This would be where that trial would go down, assuming Sheriff Sills is able to catch the guy or make an arrest. If this case gets to that point, this is where it would land. This is where the final chapter of the Dermond case kind of gets laid out, assuming they make an arrest. Probably gonna be a lot of people paying attention when and if the case ever gets to that point. It's gonna be a full house in there.
Next time on Deviant, we try to make sense of all this.
Have you brought in a profiler? Or is that something that you guys have lent?
We've done that. We've gone down that path.
Way back in 2014. Yeah.
There are lots of competing factors about this crime scene. There's a decapitation, there's a gunshot, and there's even a possible abduction if Shirley was taken before she was killed. It's a lot. So what actually happened? Who would do something like this and why? As we wrap up our exploration of this crime, we'll hear from two profilers, one of whom actually worked this case. Until next time, thanks for listening. Deviant is written, produced, and executive produced by Clark Goldband, Andrew Iden, and me, Dan Semitovich. We have some fine editorial and production consulting from Jenny Ament, and original scoring by Shuvo Sir. Sales, marketing, and distribution support comes from our partners at Gemini 13. Deviant is a production of Cold Open Media. We'll see you next time.